Normally building cabinet doors or drawer fronts is just a small part of a bigger project build video, but a lot of you have been asking for me to make a standalone video really diving in and slowing down all about cabinet doors. So let's get into it. Of course, I am going to actually go through the complete build process, but we got to start at the beginning because a lot of the questions seem to be about measuring, sizing, spacing, terminology, just all that type of stuff. So like I said, we're going to start right at the beginning. So if you're not into all the talking, just bear with me. We're going to get to building some doors here in a bit. But first, we got to start with what type of cabinet we're actually building the doors or drawer fronts for. And here on the table, I have a face frame cabinet. We have the cabinet box with an additional frame applied to the face of the cabinet. And then behind me would be an example of a frameless or Euro style cabinet, where it's just the cabinet side panels and there's no additional frame applied on the front. I'm going to try not to make this video confusing, but I do want to talk about several different styles and ways to do things, just so you have all the information that you need. So we have a face frame cabinet. So then you got to decide, do you want it to do an inset door, where the door or drawer fronts are inside the face frame, or an overlay, meaning it's outside of the face frame. So let's start with an overlay door. Now you got to decide how much you want it to overlay onto the face frame. I would say most common is probably a 1/2 inch, but there's 3/4 inch. I even have some 5/8 hinges here. And this does matter because the hinges are different depending on how much you want it to overlay. So that's something you got to determine right up front. Like I said, 1/2 inch probably is most common, but it's woodworking. We can do custom stuff. We can do whatever you want it to look like. And here's just a closer look at an overlay hinge for a face frame cabinet. See, there's 2 little tabs here just to hug right around the face frame. Like I said, there's different sizes, all sorts of adjustment, soft close, all sorts of options for these. So let's go ahead and do a 1/2 inch overlay just as an example here. As you can see, I've measured out the opening. It's 15 inches wide, 27 inches tall. So we're going to add a 1/2 inch on each side. So our door is actually going to be 16 inches wide. And then again, 27 plus a 1/2 and a 1/2, 28 inches tall. I will get to actually showing the whole process of building 5-piece frame and panel doors, but just to get done with this example here, 16 inches wide, 28 inches tall. It gives us a 1/2 inch all around. And nothing wrong with a nice flat panel cabinet if that's what your style. You're done, easy peasy. Now let's go ahead and do an inset door real quick. And I typically shoot for a 1/8 inch spacing all around like that. So 15 inch opening minus 1/8. So our door is going to be 14 3/4 by 26 3/4 tall. Okay, I got that cut down, so I'll take some 1/8 inch spacers here. This is a really handy thing to have. I'll leave a link down below to these for all these spacers, as well as some of the hinges and router bits that I'm going to show later. But let's put those 1/8 inch spacers there to set it up on. And there you go. If I hold it in there straight, 1/8 inch all the way around. And then here's an up close of the hinges that I like to use for inset doors with a face frame. They're a 2-piece hinge, so you can put one on the door and then install the other. But they just install on there's a little lip on this plate, and they install on the back of the face frame. There's screw holes in that plate. And that allows you to have inset doors with a face frame. Pretty slick. Okay, jumping over to a frameless cabinet real quick. This won't take as long. But again, an inset door, just like the face frame cabinet, you're just going to measure the inside of your box here, subtract 1/8 inch all the way around, and then you have your inset door. This door that I have on here is what's called a full overlay door. You can see it's completely flush with the outside of the box, all 4 sides. So to measure for this, you would just take your measurements from the outside, and your door is simply the same size. As you can see, the hinges are just screwed on the inside panel there, and these are called full overlay frameless hinges. And then another thing you can get into is half or partial overlay hinges. And that you'd want to use those if you have like two doors coming together on one panel. They're either called half or partial overlay hinges. And just to show you and go ahead and round that out, here we have Inset frameless hinges. Again, they're just screwed on the inside of the panel there. And these allow you to have inset doors for a frameless cabinet. As you can see, there's lots of options, but that's at least how you do the math to figure out the sizing and the different type of hinges. But let's go ahead and get started building a 5-piece frame and panel door. But first, more math. The first thing we got to decide is how wide we want our rails and stiles to be. And just real quick, stiles are the vertical pieces and rails are the horizontal pieces. So, like I said, step one, how wide do we want those to be? And again, that's something that can change. It just depends on your eye and the look that you're wanting. Here in this example, I'm going to use 2-inch wide pieces. But as you can see here on my shop cabinets, these pieces are all 3-inch wide. These are really big doors and drawer fronts, so I think the 3-inch looks pretty good. But again, that's just something that can change. But like I said, in this example, we're going to do 2 inches. So the stiles are really easy. Again, I'm going to do a 1/2-inch overlay door here. So again, our opening is 27 inches, 1/2 inch top and bottom. Our piece needs to be 28 inches long, and we already decided that we're going to do 2 inches wide. So that's it. The stiles are done. The rails that go in between these stiles is what's going to take some more math to figure out. Again, we have a 15-inch opening, going to do a 1/2 inch overlay, so our overall door needs to be 16 inches wide. Then from that, we're going to subtract 2 for both of the stiles, so 4. So 12 inches in between here. Now we can't just cut these pieces at 12 inches because there's going to be grooves on all these stiles and then tongues on these pieces that extend into those grooves. So we got to extend that measurement by the size of our tongue, as you can see here. I'm going to show an option of making frame and panel cabinet doors on a table saw later in the video. But first, we're going to start with on the router table using router bits. And the size of our tongue is going to depend on your router bits. I pretty much exclusively use these Freud bits. This isn't a sponsored video, but that brings up a good point because I've seen this tongue dimension change depending on what brand of bits you're using. On all these Freud bits, these tongues are all 7/16 of an inch. So it's just nice that I have several different profiles and they're all the same, so I don't have to worry about that changing. But that's something you need to be aware of. Whatever router bit you're using, you have to figure out what size of tongue it's going to cut. But like I said, we're at 7/16 right here. So back to our math, we have to add our tongues onto that 12 inches, and 7/16 times 2 is 7/8. So it's really not that hard of math. So 12 plus 7/8, 12 and 7/8 is what we need to cut these pieces to. Okay, so we've got all our pieces cut to size, and this is just a little tip, something I like to do. We're going to run these through the router table face down. So I'll go ahead and look at my pieces. It doesn't really matter here, but I'll put my best face that I want my actual outside of the cabinet door to be, put that face down, and then I'll just take a little piece of tape, maybe put it on there, or just mark the back. And that's just a little helpful reminder, because if we don't get our router bits set up exactly dead on 100% perfect, it doesn't matter, because we're going to make sure we run all of our pieces face down how we want. For example, if you're running a tongue through and you run it through this way, you don't want to accidentally flip it like that and run it like that, because then if your bit's not exactly, like I said, dead on perfect, you're going to end up flush on one side and maybe sunken in on the other side. This way, at least you run it through, and then you make sure your tape is still on top, run that side through, and both sides are going to be the same. I'm going to start with the groove bit, which is this one here, and run all 4 pieces through. But I just want to talk about these bits a little bit more. Again, not sponsored, I just really do like these. especially the shaker profile here with the beveled edge on the inside. Really popular right now. But all these Freud bits that I have, they're adjustable. There's little shims in here. So you can use these with material thicker or thinner than 3/4 of an inch. But you'll also want to adjust the thickness of that groove and tongue to match the thickness of your center material that you're going to use. I probably have these set up for 1/4 inch MDF right now for paint grade stuff. And of course, 1/4 inch plywood is thinner. So you'd want to adjust that to match the thickness of your center material. Okay, I've got the center marked out here. And like I said, it does not have to be 100% perfect. You can be as precise as you want to be, but again, as long as they're all ran through the same, it's going to turn out great. We got our height set. Now the only other setup to do is to take a straight edge and put it on this bearing right here to flush up our back fence with that. And you do not need a fancy, expensive router table. I made hundreds and hundreds of doors with just a budget Bosch router table. Great results every time. Got the grooves cut in all 4 pieces. Now we're going to swap over to the other router bit and cut the tongues on just the rails. I'm going to use a coping sled to run these pieces through, so I have my pieces set on here so I can set up the height. Just using my actual pieces to get it initially set up, but you do not want to just run your pieces through, just eyeballing it like that. You want to go ahead and have some extra material on hand that you can run through and make test passes, just in case you have to do any micro adjustments to get it dialed in perfect. Now again, last thing is to set the back fence flush with the bearing that's up inside on this bit. I do highly recommend getting and using a coping sled. This is just an affordable one off Amazon. Works great. But if you're only making a couple doors and you don't want to do that, you definitely don't want to just try to run your piece through like this. But you can go ahead and just get a wider backer here. Make sure it's cut square. That way you have more of a reference surface and you just hold it like that and run it through just fine. Okay, let's test out our fit. Well, I actually kind of nailed the height setup first try, so we'll just leave it as is. If you were proud or short, you would just adjust the router bit to get that dialed in. And like I said, just use scrap wood and cut that off and redo it until you get a good fit. But again, going back to those adjustable router bits, you see I got this set up to how I like it. It's a nice snug fit. My piece isn't falling off. But also, you're going to add glue to this tongue, and it's going to swell pretty instantly. So you don't want it super tight right now to where it's going to be really hard when you're actually assembling these. That's just a good, nice fit right there. All right, the outer frame is fitting great, so let's go ahead and cut a center panel to size. We already know the width because it's the same as these. Again, 12 inches plus 7/8 to account for the tongues. And that makes it tight to the groove on the inside. Inside here, we have 24 inches plus 7/8, 24 and 7/8. And again, those are tight measurements. So you'll always want to take a little bit off of that just to make assembly easier. So 24 and 7/8 and 12 and 7/8 minus a little bit, which I conveniently have right here. There we go, one complete cabinet door. Now to glue these up, it's really simple. You just add glue to those tongues and then you can clamp it together. And a little trick if you're making a bunch of doors and you don't have a bunch of clamps is you use a clamp to pull these tight and then just use 23 gauge pins and just pin right here to lock those tongues in place. Then you can take your clamps off and go ahead and assemble another door. And just tiny 23 gauge pins, easy to fill, paint, whatever. And here I'm just using 1/4 inch plywood for the center panel. Of course, you can use solid wood raised panels and get into a whole bunch of more stuff, but we're gonna keep it simple for this video. At least you know the general process and all the sizing to get it done. And to go ahead and complete the whole process, the next thing you'll want to do after the glue dries is to get your holes for your hinges drilled. This is just a Craig jig. It's affordable, works great. Of course, you can use a drill press with stop block setup and everything. But again, this pretty DIY tool, but it just works great, does the job. Maybe line the edge up right there, get your hole drilled, hinge installed. And then last but not least is getting it attached to the box. This is a 1.5 inch face frame. So since we're doing a 1/2 inch overlay, here I just have a 1 inch block so I can set my door on, make it easy. Get those hinges installed right there. You can see I've got a 1/2 inch up top. And that's it. The router table is definitely my preferred way. I just think it's more efficient. And of course, all the different profile router bits you can use. But I said I'd show you an option on the table saw. So you can just make square edge, shaker style cabinet doors really easy on the table saw. I'm just gonna use a single blade here. You could use a dado stack as well. But I'm gonna use all the same measurements as before just to make it easy. So I have the blade set at 7/16 of an inch to cut 7/16 of an inch deep. And then I have it roughly set up to where I'm cutting it right in the center of my material. I'm gonna run it through and then I'm gonna flip it and run it back through again. And what that's gonna do is ensure I'm cutting dead center right in the middle of the material. Do a quick test here. And as you can see, I'm not cutting wide enough to fit my 1/4 inch plywood. So I'm gonna bump the fence over and run the pieces through again, flipping both ways. And there we go, that's a nice fit. So I don't have to adjust the fence anymore. I can just run the other 3 pieces through and get those done. With the grooves cut on all 4 pieces, now we can move on to the tongues on the rails. And again, I'm going to use one of my actual pieces to initially set the blade height. Then I'm going to use a little scrap block and make some test passes until I get a good fit to fit inside the grooves we already cut. I'm getting way too lucky today with my initial test passes when it comes to setup, but we're good with that height right there. So now we can go ahead and get our fence set up to cut the tongues. And again, I'm just using 7/16 because I already cut these pieces to length for use with the router bits. if you're doing this on a table saw, go ahead and use a measurement like a half inch for your blade initially to make the grooves. And then to set up a stop block, you'll want to set it up a half inch away from that side of the blade. So you're cutting a half inch deep tongue. But here in my case, I have it set up at 7/16 from this side of the blade to my stop block. And you want to use a stop block. You don't want to try to run your piece through along the fence. You can hit that and then run your piece through, and you're not going to bind up on your fence or anything. Here we go, a nice square edge shaker style door, no router table, no problem. One thing to note is I do have a flat tooth grind blade in there. So all these tongues and the grooves, they're nice and flat. There's no ridges from the blade. So that's something to keep in mind. Or if you are using a dado stack to make it go even faster, those usually have flat tooth grinds on them. Here we go, glue and clamp, nice and clean. All right, there are so many options and other things we can get into, but hopefully this video laid the groundwork of a good place to start and a general knowledge on how this stuff works and goes together. I'll leave links below to some of my favorite jigs and bits and whatnot that I like to use. If you have any comments or questions at all, just drop them down below. I'll be sure to help you out. But until next time, take care.